بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا محمد بن عبد الله عليه أفضل الصلوات وأتم التسليم. This lecture deals with the purely sensory cranial nerves. These are the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerves, the second cranial nerve, the optic nerve, and the eighth cranial nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve, and also we will study the pathways for these nerves. Firstly, the olfactory nerves. The olfactory nerves arise from the olfactory receptor nerve cells in the olfactory mucous membrane located in the upper part of the nasal cavity above the level of the superior concha. The olfactory receptor cells are scattered among the supporting cells. Each receptor cell consists of a small bipolar nerve cell with coarse peripheral process and pass to the surface of the membrane and a 5 central process. From the coarse peripheral process, a number of short cilia arise, the olfactory hairs, which project into the mucus covering the surface of the mucous membrane. These projecting hairs react to odors in the air and stimulate the olfactory cells. The 5 central processes form the olfactory nerve fibers. Bundles of these nerve fibers pass through the opening of the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone to enter the olfactory bulb. The olfactory nerve fibers are unmyelinated and are covered with Schwann cells. The olfactory bulb. This is ovoid structure, possesses several types of nerve cells, the largest of which is the mitral cell. The incoming olfactory nerve fibers synapse with the dendrites of the mitral cells and form rounded areas known as synaptic glomeruli. Smaller nerve cells called tufted cells and granular cells also synapse with the mitral cells. The olfactory bulb in addition receives axons from the contralateral olfactory bulb through the olfactory tract. The olfactory tract. This is narrow band of white matter run from the posterior end of olfactory bulb beneath the inferior surface of the frontal lobe of the brain. It consists of the central axons of the mitral and tufted cells of the olfactory bulb, and some centrifugal fibers from the opposite olfactory bulb. As the olfactory tract reaches the anterior perforated substance, it divides into medial and lateral olfactory stria. The lateral stria carries the axons to the olfactory area of the cerebral cortex, namely the para-amygdaloid and pre-piriform areas. The medial olfactory stria carries the fibers that cross the median plane and the anterior commissure to pass to the olfactory bulb of the opposite side. The peri-amygdaloid and pre-piriform areas of the cerebral cortex are often known as the primary olfactory cortex. The entorhinal area 28 of the para-hippocampal gyrus, which receives numerous connections from the primary olfactory cortex, is called secondary olfactory cortex. These areas of the cortex are responsible for appreciation of the olfactory sensations. Note that, in contrast to all sensory pathways, the olfactory afferent pathway has only 2 neurons and reaches the cerebral cortex without synapsing in one of the thalamic nuclei. The primary olfactory cortex sends nerve fibers to many other centers within the brain to establish connections for emotional and autonomic responses to the olfactory sensations. This figure, or these figures, shows the olfactory nerves and olfactory pathway. Thank you. Secondly, we are going to study the second optic nerve and the visual pathway. The optic nerve, the fibers of the optic nerve are the axons of the cells in the ganglionic layer of the retina. They converge on the optic disc and exit from the orbit about 3 or 4 millimeter to the nasal side of its center as the optic nerve. The fibers of the optic nerve are myelinated, but the sheath are formed from the oligodendrites rather than the Schwann cells, since the optic nerve is comparable to a tract within the central nervous system. The optic nerve leaves the orbital cavity through the optic canal and unites with the optic nerve of the opposite side to form the optic chiasm. This figure shows the optic nerve and visual pathway. Optic chiasm. The optic chiasm is situated at the junction of the anterior wall and floor of the third ventricle. Its anterolateral angles are continuous with the optic nerves, and the posterolateral angle are continuous with the optic tracts. In the chiasma, the fibers from the nasal half of each retina, including the nasal half of the macula, cross the middle line and enter the optic tract of the opposite side, while fibers from the temporal half of each retina, including the temporal half of the macula, pass posteriorly in the optic tract of the same side. The optic tract. The optic tract emerges from the optic chiasma and passes posterolaterally around the cerebral peduncle. Most of the fibers now terminate by synapsing with the nerve cells in the lateral geniculate body, which is a small projection from the posterior part of the thalamus. A few of the fibers pass to the pretectal nucleus and the superior colliculus of the midbrain and are concerned with light reflexes. The lateral geniculate body is a small oval swelling projecting from vulvar of the thalamus. It consists of 6 layers of cells which synapse the axons of the optic tract. The axons of the nerve cells within the lateral geniculate body leave it to form the optic radiation. The fibers of the optic radiation are the axons of the nerve cells of the lateral geniculate body. The tract passes posteriorly through the retrolenticular part of the internal capsule and terminate in the visual cortex area 17. The visual association cortex areas 18 and 19 is responsible for recognition of the objects and perception of color. Neurons of the visual pathway and binocular vision. Four neurons conduct visual impulses to the visual cortex. Number 1, rods and cones, which are specialized receptor neurons in the retina. Bipolar neurons, which connect the rods and cones to the ganglion cells. Ganglion cells whose axons pass to lateral geniculate body, and neurons of the lateral geniculate body whose axons pass to the cerebral cortex. In binocular vision, the right and left fields of vision are projected on portions of both retina. The image of an object in the right field of vision is projected on the nasal half of the right retina and the temporal half of the left retina. In the optic chiasm, the axons from these two retinal halves are combined to form the left optic tract. The lateral gyrocanoid body neurons now project the complete right field of vision on the visual cortex of the left hemisphere and the left visual field on the visual cortex of the right hemisphere. The lower retinal quadrant's upper field of vision project on the lower wall of the calcarine sulcus, while the upper retinal quadrant, the lower field of vision, project on the upper wall of the calcarine sulcus. Note also that the macula lutea is represented on the posterior part of area 17 and the periphery of the retina is represented anteriorly. This figure shows the visual pathway, the optic nerve and the visual reflexes. Visual reflexes. Firstly, direct and consensual light reflexes. If a light is shown into one eye, the pupils of both eyes normally constrict. The constriction of the pupil on which the light is shown is called direct light reflex, while the constriction of the opposite pupil even though no light field on that eye is called consensual light reflex. Accommodation reflex. When the eyes are directed from distant to a near object, contraction of the medial recti brings about convergence of the ocular axis and lens thickens to increase its refractive power by contraction of the ciliary muscle, and the pupils constrict to restrict light waves to the thickest central part of the retina, to the thickest part of the lens. This is the corneal reflex, figure A. Figure B, visual body reflexes. Corneal reflex. Light touching of the cornea or conjunctiva results in blinking of the eyelids. Afferent impulses from the cornea or conjunctiva travel through the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve to the sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Internucleal neurons connect the motor nucleus of the facial on both sides through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. The facial nerve and its branches supply the orbicularis oculi, which cause closure of the eyelids. Visual body reflexes. The automatic scanning movements of the eye and the head that are made when reading, the automatic movement of the eyes, head and the neck towards the source of the visual stimulus, and the protective closing of the eyes and even raising of the arm for protection are reflex actions that involve the following reflex arcs. This figure shows abnormalities in the visual pathways. Thank you. Lastly, we are going to discuss the vestibulocochlear nerve and the auditory pathway. The vestibulocochlear nerve, which is the eighth nerve, cranial nerve. This nerve consists of two distinct parts, vestibular nerve and cochlear nerve, which are concerned with the transmission of afferent information from the inner ear to the central nervous system. The vestibular nerve conducts nerve impulses from the utricle and saccule that provide information concerning the position of the head. The nerve also conducts impulses from the semicircular canals that provides information concerning movements of the head. The nerve fibers of the vestibular nerve are the central processes of the nerve cells located in the vestibular ganglion, which is situated in the internal acoustic meatus. They enter the anterior surface of the brainstem in a groove between the lower border of the bones and the upper border of the medulla oblongata. When they enter the vestibular nuclear complex, the fibers divide into short ascending and long descending fibers. A small number of fibers pass directly to the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, bypassing the vestibular nuclei. The vestibular nuclear complex consists of a group of nuclei situated beneath the floor of the fourth ventricle. 4 nuclei can be recognized: the lateral ventral nucleus, the superior vestibular nucleus, the superior vestibular nucleus, the medial vestibular nucleus, and the inferior vestibular nucleus. The vestibular nuclei receive afferent fibers from the utricle and saccule and semicircular canals through the vestibular nerve, and fibers from the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Afferent fibers from these nuclei pass to the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Afferent fibers also descend uncrossed to the spinal cord from the lateral vestibular nucleus and form the vestibulospinal tract. In addition, afferent fibers pass to the nuclei of oculomotor, trochlear, and abducent nerves through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. These connections enable the movements of the head and eyes to be coordinated so that visual fixation on an object can be maintained. In addition, information received from the internal ear can assist in maintaining balance by influencing the muscle tone of the limbs and trunk. Ascending fibers also pass upward from the vestibular nuclei to the cerebral cortex to the vestibular area in the post-central gyrus just above the lateral fissure. These fibers are thought to relay in the ventral posterior nuclei of the thalamus. The cerebral cortex probably serves to orient the individual consciously in space. Now, the cochlear nerve. The cochlear nerve conducts nerve impulses concerned with sound from the organ of corti in the cochlea. The fibers of the cochlear nerve are the central processes of the nerve cells located in the spiral ganglion of the cochlea. They enter the anterior surface of the brainstem at the lower border of the bones on the lateral side of the emerging facial nerve and are separated from it by the vestibular nerve. On entering the bones, the nerve fibers divide, with one branch entering the posterior cochlear nucleus and the other branch entering the anterior cochlear nucleus. Cochlear nuclei. The anterior and the posterior cochlear nuclei are situated on the surface of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. They receive afferent fibers from the cochlea through the cochlear nerve. The cochlear nuclei send axons, which are the second order neurofibers, that run medially through the bones to end in the trapezoid body and the olivary nucleus. Here, they are relayed in the posterior nucleus of the trapezoid body and the superior olivary nucleus on the same or the opposite side. The axons now ascend through the posterior part of the bones and the midbrain and form a tract known as the lateral meniscus. Each lateral meniscus therefore consists of a third order neuron from both sides. As these fibers ascend, some of them relay in small groups of nerve cells collectively known as the nucleus of the lateral meniscus. On reaching the midbrain, the fibers of lateral lemniscus either terminate in the nucleus of the inferior colliculus or are relayed to medial geniculate body and pass to the auditory cortex of the cerebral hemisphere through the acoustic radiations of the internal capsule. The primary auditory cortex, areas 41 and 42, includes the gyrus of Hissel on the upper surface of the superior temporal gyrus. The recognition and the interpretations of the sounds on the basis of the past experience take place in the secondary auditory area. Nerve impulses from the ear are transmitted along the auditory pathway on both sides of brainstem, with more being projected along the contralateral pathway. Many collateral branches are given up to the reticular activating system of brainstem. The tone-topic organization present on the organ of Corti preserved within the cochlear nuclei, inferior colliculi, and the primary auditory area. Descending auditory pathways originating in the auditory cortex and other nuclei in the auditory pathway accompany the ascending pathways. These fibers are bilateral and end on the nerve cells at different levels of the auditory pathway and on the hair cells of organ of Corti. It is believed that these fibers serve as feedback mechanism and inhibit reception of sound. They may also have a role in the process of auditory sharpening, suppressing some signals and enhancing others. This figure shows the cochlear pathway, and this also shows the figure pathway on the other side. Thank you.